Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Dozens killed in Israeli strikes across Gaza, including families sheltering in a so-called safe zone. Israeli and Palestinian officials say negotiations to strike a Gaza ceasefire deal are making headway, although key differences remain. Pursuing peace in Ukraine, Slovakia's Prime Minister says he pushed for a solution to the conflict in a surprise appearance in Moscow for talks with President Putin. And President Zelensky says Ukraine's NATO membership is achievable, but Kiev will have to fight to convince its allies. Nearly 60 people have reportedly been killed by Israeli strikes in the past 24 hours, including on an Israeli-declared humanitarian so-called safe zone. Gaza medics say children are among those killed in the raid on a shelter housing displaced families in Al-Mawasi. Israel's military says it was targeting Hamas militants. The group denies it operates among civilians. The attacks come as the United Nations claims Israel is hampering the delivery of much-needed aid into the enclave. Rami Al-Magari is our correspondent in Gaza, so do tell us more about these latest strikes, please, Rami.
Yes, actually, this latest strike that what the Israeli army said that it targeted Hamas militants, but 13 people, mainly including mainly children, have been killed in this particular strike on the Mawasi area south of the Gaza Strip, just close to the British hospital, the British field hospital over the Mawasi area in southern Gaza Strip. This is not the first time that the Israeli army targets tents sheltering people on the coastal road on the Mawasi area in the central Gaza Strip, in south of the Gaza Strip, and also in Nusayrat, in different parts of Gaza. When over the past period, the people are surprised with these strikes on sheltering tents that are designated as safe zones or humanitarian zones for those displaced in those areas. More about 1 million people over there. Actually, this is coming along with other strikes in other parts of the Gaza Strip, in Nusayrat refugee camp, where an Israeli army operation is continuing over there, and to the north of the Nusayrat refugee camp, there is reportedly about some kind of excavations by the Israeli army bulldozers and armored vehicles. Actually, 13 people were left killed during these the Israeli actions on the Nusayrat refugee camp. In the northern Gaza Strip, there was intensive Israeli action over the hospital, Kamal Udwan Hospital, ordering the hospital to leave immediately towards the Indonesian hospital. According to the chief of the hospital, the Israeli army ordered them to leave towards the Indonesian hospital, and the chief says that there are no ambulances to carry those patients and injured inside the hospital towards another destination. This comes against the backdrop of more Israeli airstrikes and actions in other parts of the Gaza Strip, including the Deir al-Balah town, and there was some sort of a shelling that caused the death of 2 persons. In the southern Gaza Strip, there was an Israeli action that left 1 person killed and others injured. The different actions across the Gaza Strip. And by the way, according to health officials here in the territory, 14,500 Palestinian children have been reportedly killed since the eruption of the Israeli war against the Islamist Hamas party in Gaza in October of last year. That's the latest from the Gaza Strip for the time being, Paul. Yes,
Rami
please.
Al-Magari, thank you very much indeed. Negotiators working to secure a Gaza ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas say some gaps have narrowed, but crucial differences still remain. Mediators have stepped up efforts in recent weeks to secure a truce and the return of Israeli hostages. Our correspondent Jonathan Regev is in Tel Aviv for us now. Jonathan, what more do we know about the progress of these talks?
There is a progress, and negotiators say some 90% of the issues have been resolved, but the 10% remaining issues are difficult to resolve. They are about two different issues. First, the numbers and the identities of both the Israeli hostages that will be released and the Palestinian prisoners that will be released. Israel, of course, is demanding to have the highest possible number of Israeli living hostages. The number that has been circulating here that Israel is demanding is 34 living hostages. That would include all of the women, all of the children, all of the elderly, and all of the sick. And according to Palestinian sources, that number does not amount to 34. Therefore, Israel is also demanding to have living hostages from the next category, which is young men. It is unclear if Hamas will accept that. They could perhaps accept that if Israel adds a bigger number of Palestinian prisoners, and also their profile would be higher. What do we mean by a higher profile? As far as the Palestinians are concerned, those Palestinians that are sentenced to life in Israeli prisons, that were in charge of a violent act which killed hundreds of Israelis, they are those that the Palestinians are demanding to free from Israeli jails. This is one issue. There's also the issue of whether they will go back to their homes in the West Bank or be deported to a third country. That's also something to be discussed. And the second issue is how vast, how big will the Israeli withdrawal be from the Gaza Strip. It's already understood that there will be some Israeli presence left in the Gaza Strip after the first stage of the ceasefire. How big that presence will be, that is one of the main sticking points which for the moment is preventing the signature on the deal.
Israel is conducting a major bombing operation in southern Lebanon despite this month-long ceasefire deal with Hezbollah. What more can you tell us about that?
Yes, according to Israel, there's a ceasefire, yes, but the ceasefire comes with agreements, and if Hezbollah breaches the agreements, then according to that deal, Israel has the right to come and prevent these actions, take preemptive actions against them. And this was stated by Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz as he visited the forces in southern Lebanon on Sunday. Today, in different instances, Israel bombs installations in southern Lebanon, in the village of Nakura, for example, which is on actually on the Mediterranean coast, on the western part of the Israel-Lebanon border. According to Israel, there is Hezbollah activity which is forbidden in that area, and that is why Israel is acting. We have seen forces of the Lebanese army steadily, slowly, step by step, taking more positions which in the past were Hezbollah positions or Palestinian organizations used to be there. But Israel is demanding that this happens faster and that there is no sign whatsoever of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. As long as that happens, says Israel, and was clearly stated by the defense minister yesterday in southern Lebanon, Israel will take action, and this is what we've seen today in southern Lebanon.
Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv, thank you. The new Syrian government is continuing to build regional alliances with visits to Damascus by Jordan's foreign minister and Qatari officials. This flurry of diplomacy and the momentous events over the past few weeks are being watched closely by Syrians who fled the country's civil war. Cgtn's Rahul Pathak reports from London on the dilemma many now face.
Dr. Fatima Abbas is one of the 30,000 Syrians who've made the UK their home, having arrived in 2022. She, like many of her compatriots, watched in amazement as the only Syrian government she's ever known collapsed in less than a month.
I remember I had a chat with my colleagues at work 3 days before, and I didn't give it a lot of attention because I didn't believe it's a big thing. Then when they took over Aleppo, I said, oh, this is something. I was literally 24 hours on the TV watching news. We didn't believe this day would come.
Fatima has claimed asylum in Britain. However, her application is currently in limbo after the UK Home Office paused all Syrian asylum claims whilst the government assesses the current situation in that country. Following the fall of Damascus to rebel forces, many Syrians in the UK, like activist Raya Homsi, have been trying to find out about loved ones back home.
I couldn't see my family since I left, apart from a very quick visit to Lebanon in 2017. But I couldn't go back to the country. There were times where they were very tough for my parents, and I really wanted to be with them, but I was not able to do that. My dad, for example, had a heart operation, and it was a very serious one, and all what I wanted just to be by his side. There were these moments where you don't know if you're going to see him again or these kind of things, but thankfully he's okay, and I can't wait to see them.
In recent weeks, much of the world's focus has been on the rebel group that helped oust the Syrian government, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, and in particular their leader, Ahmad al-Sharaa, formerly known as Mohammed al-Jalani. Previously a jihadist with links to al-Qaeda, Syria's de facto leader has been trying to show a more moderate side. However, Syrians in the UK say the proof of his motives will be in his actions rather than his words.
It's early to judge. We have hope, but we need to be cautious. We need to be critical about anything we hear and we see until we find the right process.
Now, the Syrian civil war forced millions to flee the country and seek asylum in places like the UK. Now, while some are already dreaming of returning back to Syria for good, others are just hoping to be reunited with relatives they haven't seen in person for 13 years. All of them, though, will be hoping that Syrians can draw a line under years of conflict and look forward to a more positive future. Rahul Pathak, Cgtn, London.
Mourners have been leaving tributes outside a church in the German city of Magdeburg after 5 people were killed and scores injured in an attack on a Christmas market on Friday. A 50-year-old Saudi man suspected of ploughing a car through crowds faces multiple charges of murder and attempted murder. The attack has reignited tensions in Germany over immigration. Far-right protesters held a rally in the city on Saturday demanding tighter controls. The Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić says he remains ready to listen to protesters after thousands of people rallied against him in central Belgrade. The government has faced 7 weeks of nationwide demonstrations over the collapse of a renovated train station roof in the city of Novi Sad, which killed 15 people. Protesters blame official corruption for shoddy construction, charges the government denies. US President Joe Biden has commuted the sentences of 37 out of 40 federal death row inmates, changing their punishment to life imprisonment without parole. Among those include 9 people convicted of murdering fellow prisoners. His decision comes before the return of President-elect Donald Trump in January, who restarted federal executions during his first term after a pause of nearly 2 decades. You're watching CGTN, still ahead. Slovakia's Prime Minister makes a surprise visit to Russia for talks with President Putin. We're live in Moscow next.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
You might think you are better informed in an information age. The fact is, people are more often misled by misinformation. You might think every voice is heard in a digital world. The fact is, many nations and peoples are still underrepresented. And data poverty shuts out many. We at CGTN are committed to transcending the information gap and the digital divide. CGTN, bridging nations and civilizations. CGTN, see the difference.
Hello, welcome back. These are the headlines. Dozens killed in Israeli strikes across Gaza, including families sheltering in a so-called safe zone. And Israeli and Palestinian officials say negotiations to strike a Gaza ceasefire deal are making headway, although key differences remain. Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico says he discussed ways to find a peaceful solution to the conflict in Ukraine during a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. In a surprise visit to Moscow, Fico says the two sides also discussed supplies of Russian gas to Slovakia. The visit, only the third by a European leader since the Ukraine conflict began, comes as a contract allowing Russian gas to transit through Ukraine nears expiry. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova is in Moscow for us now. Dasha, there you are. Hello. What more have the leaders discussed?
Well, indeed, that was a very surprise visit for many, and in the words of Robert Fico himself, his trip to Moscow was actually the reaction to the earlier statements coming from Ukraine that there will be the suspension of the transit of Russian gas to Slovakia. Robert Fico has said that that would lead to the very catastrophic consequences for his country, and therefore he was in the Russian capital to guarantee that the taps won't be turned off. We also understand that Vladimir Putin, according to the Kremlin, has confirmed that Moscow is ready to continue its supplies and reminded that Ukraine has actually been paid for the transit of the Russian gas. It was paid from $700 to $800 million every year. So we understand that was the focus of those discussions. But at the same time, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said they too have had a chance to talk about bilateral ties, which according to Moscow have been significantly deteriorated by the previous authorities in Slovakia, and also to talk about the ways to end the conflict in Ukraine, with the Russian President Vladimir Putin actually, according to the Kremlin, outlining his vision of how this conflict could end.
And on the battlefront, Russia claims it's made some gains in Ukraine.
That's right, and actually it's been quite a regular thing now to hear from the Russian Ministry of Defense more confirmation about more territorial gains when it comes to the area of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine. Now understand that the village of Storzhevoye in the Donetsk People's Republic has come under the control of the Russian armed forces. That comes after the nearby villages have also come under the control of the Russian military. Those are Urozhaine, Makarovka, about which the Russian Ministry of Defense has confirmed the seizure on the 14th of July and then on the 16th of November. We also hearing about more gains and about more advances in Russian Kursk region, which has been taken under, parts of which have been taken by the Ukrainian military under their control in August. And we also understand that Moscow insists it has the upper hand when it comes to the fighting along the entire front line in Ukraine. Also, interestingly, we've heard from the Russian Rostech company that they have been supplying more Su-35 bombers as well as Su-57 fighter jets to the Russian military who are fighting. So certainly the understanding here in Russia is that Russia not only has the upper hand on the battlefield, but it also has the military advantage when it comes to the equipment that they use.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you. Volodymyr Zelensky has told Ukraine's diplomats the country will have to fight to persuade allies to allow it to join NATO. However, the president described the goal as achievable. Our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Kiev for us now. So, Alex, what more do we know about Kiev's efforts to join NATO?
Well, certainly the Ukrainian government very pragmatic about this situation. They are aware that it is an uphill struggle, particularly with the incoming US administration, to have their country join NATO. NATO is the security guarantee the Ukrainian government has wanted since the start of this war to ensure its security in the future. That is the perspective from the Ukrainian side. Volodymyr Zelensky in the last 24 hours or so talking to diplomats here, saying that it is achievable, but at every level diplomatically Ukraine is going to have to work very hard to make that possible. Of course, because incoming President-elect Donald Trump has been skeptical consistently now of Ukraine joining NATO. He sees that as a potential escalation, in line certainly with what we've heard from the Kremlin as well. To give you a sense of how Ukrainians feel about NATO membership, they are broadly supportive, and actually a poll out today, which was conducted at the end of November, start of December, shows that 47% of respondents on this poll suggest that they would be willing to give up territories occupied by Russia, Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia, if they joined the NATO alliance. About 47% of Ukrainians polled saying that they are willing to compromise, give up those territories occupied by Russia if it comes with NATO membership. That does not seem a likely path, certainly with the position of the US administration, but it is still Ukraine's desire.
And another story, Alex, there are claims that soldiers from the DPRK have suffered severe casualties while fighting in Ukraine.
Yeah, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff, 1,100 North Korean troops have been killed in this conflict, fighting in Russia's Kursk region against Ukrainian forces. That tracks with the estimates we've heard from the Pentagon and from Ukrainian forces. So very heavy casualties for those North Korean soldiers. And particularly, we've heard from the Ukrainian president, who says that these numbers are probably a low estimate because, according to him, Russia is trying to hide North Korean casualties in this conflict, accusing Russian forces of defacing, of burning the faces of North Korean soldiers so they cannot be identified. We've also heard Ukrainian intelligence sources saying that fake Russian documents are being issued to those North Korean soldiers. But the estimate from South Korea, 1,100 soldiers from the DPRK killed in this conflict. I have spoken to soldiers who have been on the Ukrainian front lines, and they have described North Korean soldiers as lacking training, though very brave, not trained, and therefore not able to make a real difference in this conflict.
Alex Cartier, thank you very much for that. Alex, reporting there from Kiev. This year saw China's President Xi Jinping complete a 5-day tour in Europe in May, visiting France, Serbia and Hungary. The aim of the tour was to strengthen China's historical ties with the three countries while looking to boost future relations with the European Union. Our correspondent Li Jianhua has more.
5 years after his last state visit, Chinese President Xi Jinping began his European tour in France. In the 1960s, this European country was the first major Western nation to officially recognize the new China. The two leaders signed nearly 20 agreements on trade and sought common ground on conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East. President Emmanuel Macron said bilateral ties were based on common ambitions.
Our bilateral relationship is variable and successful and is based on ability to discuss all subjects with complete confidence. It is also based on common ambitions.
Meanwhile, President Xi highlighted the importance of ongoing dialogue.
Montaigne, the famous French thinker, said that friendship comes from exchange. It is only through more exchanges that we can continue to accumulate consensus.
The visit also occurred during a delicate period in China-EU ties, with the trading bloc adopting a more assertive stance towards Beijing. Xi urged mutual respect and a positive China policy.
The European Union and China want good relations, and given the global weight of China, our engagement is key to ensure mutual respect, to avoid misunderstanding, and to find solutions to global challenges.
In a personal gesture, Macron hosted the Chinese leader in the Pyrenees for private meetings, a place tied to Macron's childhood visits to his grandmother. The next stop was Serbia, whose relationship with China has been described as ironclad by both sides. This was Xi's second state visit in 7 years, during which bilateral ties were elevated to a China-Serbia community with a shared future, the first between China and a European nation.
Serbia and China are moving from strategic relations to which we managed to elevate our bilateral relations. We are transitioning to a community that talks about the shared future of our two nations.
Serbia is China's largest investment destination in Central and Eastern Europe. Agreements signed included free trade, infrastructure, and more cultural and educational exchanges.
China and Serbia are true friends and good partners. Political mutual trust between the two countries is rock solid.
The last leg of the trip was Hungary, where the two countries marked 75 years of diplomatic ties. Xi described relations as the best in history, calling for more cooperation in sectors including infrastructure, new energy and telecommunications.
20 years ago, we see that the value of our trade was $3 billion during the last Chinese presidential visit, and now it's $12 billion, which is 4 times more than it was then.
Starting in 2022, Hungary began to position itself as a global hub for electric cars, with the Chinese EV makers flourishing there, a thorny issue now between China and the European Union.
China supports Hungary in playing a bigger role in the EU and pushing for new and greater development of China-EU relations.
From celebrating historic relations to inking new agreements, the tour underscored Beijing's diplomatic efforts to forge lasting partnerships amid a period of global uncertainty. Li Jianhua, Cgtn.
And the headlines again. Dozens killed in Israeli strikes across Gaza, including families sheltering in a so-called safe zone. Israeli and Palestinian officials say negotiations to strike a Gaza ceasefire deal are making headway, although key differences remain. And pursuing peace in Ukraine, Slovakia's Prime Minister says he pushed for a solution to the conflict in a surprise appearance in Moscow for talks with President Putin. And that's The World Today. Thanks for watching. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Up next, it's World Insight with Tian Wei. For now, though, from all the team in London, goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Jenny. Well, over to Europe. Increasing precipitation is likely to batter the majority of Italy as well as the Balkans from Tuesday towards into Wednesday. And the situation will be a little bit complicated as we are likely to see quite a lot of rain, snow, the winter mix, and the potential transition from rain towards into snow as the temperatures are likely to become much colder here in the region over the next couple of days. So please take necessary precaution to stay safe and keep your eyes closely here on the latest weather update. And speaking of the temperatures fluctuation, probably round of warm-up is likely to develop here from the west all the way towards into the central as well as the eastern portions of Europe from Tuesday towards into Wednesday. And in the wake of this round of warm-up, we can notice that many of the high temperatures across the majority of the western portion of Europe will be returning towards into the double digits. And even for portions of the western portion of Russia will probably experience the maximum temperatures returning towards into the positive readings and will be probably heading there for another couple of days. So please enjoy the warmer high temperatures as well as you can. And about business and travel, and overcast conditions for both London and Paris with high temperatures around 11. And down in Madrid we'll see quite clear skies on Wednesday. But notice that the temperatures difference between the highs and lows will be rather big. So please dress up accordingly. And that is all from me. Stay tuned for more. City Forecast.